Hello, and welcome to installment 2 of our Proficient video series on Supply Chain Control Tower. Today I'm joined by Eric Walk. Eric is a director in our Strategy and Transformation group here at Proficient. Welcome, Eric.
Great to be here, Sean.
So first off, before we get rolling, let's do a quick summary on what is Supply Chain Control Tower. A Supply Chain Control Tower is essentially a dashboard that sits upon layers of information. The first layer of information is our internal systems, such as our ERP. The second layer of data is our systems of our stakeholders. And the last layer of data is news sources, such as social media and weather platforms. Now, first off, Eric, when we're stitching together layer 1, our internal systems, walk us through how you go about doing that.
Yeah, so the first question you always have to ask when you're thinking about data integration is how fast is the data moving and how can I best integrate with it? So from a speed perspective, the question becomes, are we needing data in real time or at speed in order to make good decisions, or can it wait? Right? Can it be yesterday's data in order to make those decisions? And when we look at our control tower, it's really important to understand each feed and the speed it moves at, so that we can make the right decisions about how to build those integrations to optimize for how much money we're spending building the integration, managing the integration, and maintaining the infrastructure for it. So we usually think about, and you'll hear me say this a lot, is it batchy, is it streamy, or is it API-y, right? Are we dealing with something that we run on a schedule and do that integration in a scheduled way? Are we talking about something where the data is flowing automatically and we're sitting there listening and consuming it as fast as we can? Or is it a set of data that we pull when we need it and there's no particular schedule, there's no particular requirements, it's just sort of on demand and maybe static data or other kinds of information. So if you think about it, right, we might have batch data, batch processing when we're thinking about who are our suppliers, right? Metadata about the suppliers, their integration into our ERP system. But then order flow, we want to see in real time. We want to know every order as it arrives and collect that stream and monitor it in flight. And then other information like, a master database of addresses or zip codes or other things like that, we may need to refresh on demand or on occasion, but isn't necessarily needed all the time.
Outstanding. Now let's take a look at layer 2 when we're integrating with our suppliers and our carriers and so forth. What nuances are there in those integrations?
Yeah, so we look at the same sort of patterns, but now we don't control both sides. And so some of the cost questions, some of the complexity questions turn into a negotiation where we need to work with our third parties and our vendors to come up with an optimal solution that's both optimal for us and optimal for them. We have to consider load on their systems as we're querying. The more real time we want the data to flow, the higher the load is on them to be able to provide that and support it. We also need to consider security and how those connections are being maintained so that we can ensure that the data remains private and properly secured through all parts of that transaction and that interaction. But ultimately, it comes back to the same questions about the speed of the data and the speed of the analytics and the questions we're trying to answer.
Outstanding. Well, now let's talk about the less uniform data from social media or news platforms or weather. Can you talk about the nuances with engaging and interacting with those systems?
Sure. Those systems can be fairly interesting. Like other third-party systems, there will be limits on how fast you can pull and how much you can pull from them. There's also the question of speed, but sometimes it's more a question of, can your platform keep up with their speed, not the other way around? Especially you think about a platform like Twitter or Facebook where you're watching real-time events happening. Then the hard question becomes, what do we do with that data? Right? Weather data, sure, that's a little easier. It's fairly well structured. It's easy to understand. But news data, news feeds, whether it's coming from a newspaper or from social media, we need to start to integrate natural language processing into our ingestion pipelines so that we can effectively have the computer read the headline, read the article in flight, and make a decision about whether that data is useful before we persist it anywhere. so that we're really optimizing for how much data we're storing, what kind of storage we're using, and whether that data is really adding value to the pipeline or not at any given moment.
Very cool. I think that's the most fascinating part of this control tower, is looking at events around the world and how they impact our supply chain. Eric, thank you very much for sharing your expertise with us today. In subsequent videos, we're going to be going into specific use cases for a control tower for specific industries, now that we have a good foundation laid for what is control tower. Thank you for joining us today, and I hope you found this informative.